Welcome to another episode of Influence Today with Chet Tart and Terry Lyles. Hi, Terry. Welcome back.
Chet.
It's sort of part two. We're continuing our conversation on grief. The first one was chock full of information on the stages of grief, which was new to me, and also the environment and how one can grieve. I did not know that one could get caught in these valleys of grief and never get out of them. That's why it's important to have a coach, and that's why it's important to have, I guess, someone to point out the blind spots of what you don't see.
Right.
You brought up some great, interesting material about grief and how it affects us. And I was reading stuff on the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius talked about the fact that we should live our life in the fullest because we're all going to die. Death smiles at us all the time, but all men can do is smile back and move forward. I thought that was a powerful statement to make. And how to do that is not easy for everybody. What I asked you in the last episode is that if you could share some tools that you have used, and what is the biggest grief that you've been through that you were able to finish, or if you're not finished through it?
Sure. I think starting with the tool side is just understanding that there are stages of grief. Sometimes people will think I should have gotten over this loss sooner than now.
Right. I agree with you. Yep.
Or will this ever end? So they end up either, presupposing they should have been further along than they are, or that I'm stuck someplace, and they could be. That's why it could take a mental health professional, a professional coach, somebody to sideline with you and say, listen, what's happened? Where are you? Let me help you go through that process. So
just don't be embarrassed to ask. I think that's the biggest thing I see is people hate to be embarrassed and to ask for help in situations like this. Yeah. Some of them get embarrassed. Right. Okay.
Well, yeah. And I keep reminding, people that I coach and train on a regular basis, the greatest athletes and performers in the world have coaches. And I typically say, because if you're in the game, you can't see the game because you're playing the game.
Oh, great comment. That's a good one to write down. That's a Twitter one.
Exactly. You need to be objective. That's why most player coaches in professional sport rarely works, because you just can't be objective if you're processing the game as it's going on in real time. You need someone on the sideline, a coach, that's viewing back and saying, listen, you missed a shot, you missed a pass, you missed a look, you missed your blind spot. That's what coaching really is. So some of the tools are trying to assess where you are. So in the process of grief, if you realize that I don't sleep well anymore, I'm overeating, I'm under eating, I'm over medicating, I'm over drugging, I'm over, compensating, I don't know, whatever. I'm late more than I've ever been in my life. I mean, I can go on and on and on about compensatory behaviors, but those behaviors begin to say something about what may not be matriculating through us. We might be stopping. We have a leakage somewhere. So I think when we ourselves can see that, and or people around us can acknowledge that and confront us with it, that's a great point to start looking at, to say, I might need to be sharing with somebody because I don't feel myself anymore. And grief is not yourself. And I said on the other broadcast, grief is the transition between past reality and a new reality.
That's powerful. That's powerful.
And that space between this mountain and that mountain takes time, effort, energy, recovery, and transition.
Well, it takes time to think about what you just said. If we see, I don't think we hear that in our daily lives, is that past reality to the present reality.
Yeah.
The future reality is that we don't even hear that. For you to say that puts this whole grief thing in a different perspective.
Yeah.
It happened to me the other day. I'm supposed to get a hip replacement and they're moving the date to another date. And I'm like, this can't happen. I mean, the world was crushing down, but over in about an hour, I was over it and goes, okay, what's 3 more weeks?
Yeah. And see, that's what happens. You build up an expectation. I can get through this. I'm ready. And we see this in sport a lot where, you're ready to go. I see it a lot in racing. They're ready to go. They're sitting in the car. and it pours down rain and they delay the race by 2 hours. And then all of a sudden you got to back out, go back through your rituals again, start all over again, because all that energy buildup stopped. And now you got to go back and start over. And that's what grief is. Grief is not just going back and just wishing it could be the way it was. Grief is going back to what was, establishing that, owning it, and moving that to what now is going to become.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes some strength, some grit, some processing powers, because we're creatures of habit, but we're also creatures of sameness. We want to hang on. I want to hang on to what I know. That's why change is so hard within companies, within executive leadership, within performance and athletes and families, and watching your kids grow up from an infant to a toddler, to a middle schooler, to an adolescent, to an adult. All those transitional stages is grief.
Really?
All parents grieve.
Wow.
They grieve every stage, and you've got to be able to let go. Parents that can't let go of children, especially when they reach their pre-teenage years, try to hold on too tight. They push their teenagers to go do crazy things even more because they're trying to let go. The parents are supposed to start letting go. So the parents hold tighter. The student pushes out harder, and you end up with all kinds of tragedy. Life is about letting go of stages of life, no matter what that is. Businesses go through the same thing. If you don't transition from one state into business to another, as you grow, you will not only not grieve, you could lose and loss of profits because you wanted to hold on to, this is the good old way. This is the way we always did things, versus the market changed. We got to move with the market. No, we're not moving with the market. And you lose. Listen, life is about grieving. Grieving is about change. People need to understand that life, grieving, and change is life.
That's powerful. So we should just never be surprised.
No.
Because we need to get up every morning knowing that things will change today.
Yes.
And
either
we're prepared or not prepared.
And if, anything that doesn't change is dying. Cells in our body, it becomes atrophy in our muscles. It becomes dementia in our thinking and brain processing. Anything that is not changing is dying. It's a really sobering thought that if you can't get good with change, you're dead and just don't know it.
So tell us a little about the change that you went through with your son.
Yeah, so 2 months ago now, my special needs son, who's 37 years old at the time, he was a special needs son of ours, born in Anchorage, Alaska, around Elmendorf Air Force Base there in Anchorage, and, had troubles his whole life, didn't eat correctly, never walked, never spoke, never set up on his own, was in a wheelchair his whole life for that whole 37 years. And 2 months ago, went into cardiac arrest, and within 2 days, he had passed. So my wife and I had already, declared years ago, we're going to do a do not resuscitate order, which means, if you happen to go into an emergency setting of life, we're not going to try to prolong your life because of the life that he's already had and where he was medically and physically. I mean, my son was broken at every level, you know what I mean? So we decided that way beforehand. So I got a call on a Sunday afternoon and rushed to, the hospital, chasing the ambulance, got there, and within, 20 minutes, we had to make a decision. We either do the do not resuscitate order and sign it, or we put him on life support. Probably the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. Even though we'd already made the pre-decision, it's one thing to pre-decide something, it's another thing to pull the trigger. So I had to sign.
So if you did put him on life support, it was just the body, not the brain.
That's correct. We'd have had to pull the trigger eventually anyway.
Okay.
And we already knew that because we knew his physical health and his regimen for almost 4 decades. We knew it very well inside and out. So
And
we
he
said,
never
look,
talked. You said he never talked?
never spoke, never walked, never set up on his own. He was diapered and fed as an infant. He was about 4 foot tall if you could stand him up out of his wheelchair, and he weighed about 70 pounds. So he
Could you
looked like,
tell by his facial emotions? Did he know who you were? Did he,
absolutely.
you could smile and
Yeah, he was trapped in a body that just didn't work,
I see.
so he was still there, laughed, had fun, loved music, loved food, just it was great, but he just needed cared for 20, like he was like an adult infant, if you will.
Mm.
He was there. He understood. Babies express, they don't talk, but they light up, they see you, so he was like that infant mentality in a grown-up way, stuck in a body that didn't work.
So you had grief from the very beginning because you expected a normal child.
Dude, I've been grieving for 40 years.
Hmm.
37 and a half years I've been grieving his death. And I've told people this. Look, I'm a professional griever. I didn't learn this with my PhD. I have a PhD because I learned how to not give up. I've been grieving for 3.5, almost 4 decades, but it doesn't make it easier when something becomes final.
Yeah.
So signing the do not resuscitate, they took, they didn't put anything on him. They took the oxygen off. They gave him morphine to keep him comfortable, which is the protocol. And that was it. 2 days later, his body quit. And, thankfully, myself and his mother was in the room with him the moment he took his last breath. And it was really a spiritual enhancement for me. Because I literally, even though he didn't know we were there, I think he realized that we were there because he's never been alone his whole life. There was always someone caretaking for him. And so he passed, and it was really very peaceful, very emotional, obviously, but very peaceful. And when we all were ready to leave the room several hours later, after the rest of the family got there, I asked the social worker, this is where coaching comes in. We're all standing there going, we cannot leave him lying in this bed and his spirit's already gone. The body is still there. We can't walk out of this room with our last image being him lying there alone. He's never been alone in his life. And I went and got the social worker down the hall, and I came back and I said, can you sit with him and just sit next to him and hold him while we walk out of the room? And that's our last image. And she said, absolutely. So the last image we had is he was still being cared for. Those are the things that training, coaching, and life experience gives you, because I was thinking about myself and my entire family. There was no way we could leave that room with him lying there in that bed in the hospital by himself. That's just a bad image.
Sure.
So
sure.
Grief is final, but life continues. He continues inside of us. I'm still processing this. Obviously, it's only been 2 months. But
is there a time frame on processing, or it just depends on the person?
It depends on the person, how close you were to them. It usually takes months to really get through it. It can take longer, especially if you get stuck somewhere. I'm trying to process through it. I've got people I'm talking to as well. My wife is awesome. The hardest thing I've had to deal with is my 9-year-old that's trying to deal with it. And have that conversation with a 9-year-old that your brother, whom he was very close to, is gone. And he understands that theoretically, but he misses him. And he's like, so where is he? I said, well, he's in heaven. Well, is he okay? Yep. He's walking and talking and running and playing. He's good. And then he'll say, well, I want to talk to him. Well, let's pray. Let's commemorate. Let's draw things and let's put them up on the wall for him, and he'll know. So that's, to a 9-year-old, grief is very different than me as a father, that has an adult son who is, passed. And I got to say this, no parent should ever have to bury their children. It's just wrong. It's against nature. You know what I mean? It's some of the hardest grief I've helped other people through. You just shouldn't have to bury your children. It's meant that our children bury us because we get old and we die. That's their problem. I gave you everything I have. You deal with that stuff. It's just harder. And I lost my mom, my dad, my brother, a lot of people around me. I've done death and dying my whole life. Brandon was just different because I felt like a part of my soul left. So listen, grief is hard, but you know what? There's a transition that takes place. And as long as you're continually letting go, letting go, and letting go, and letting the process work, there's another side to that begins healing. And the way we know we've healed is when we can talk about them and we're okay. Doesn't mean you don't have bad moments. 30 days ago, I couldn't really hardly even talk about this, so I did my first gig like 2 weeks after, and I didn't even know if I could do it because I always share his story and I talk about this stuff, and I got through it. And it was like I was still in the shock stage, it seems like, on stage. And, it gets easier as you go, but you got to process. And a part of that is just the process itself.
What stage do you think you're in now?
Well, the shock obviously has worn off. That left pretty quickly after just, a week, several days to a week. The shock wore off. I got past the anger pretty quickly because I think, I've dealt with it for 3.5 decades because he should have died at 6 months old. So I've been in a stage of grieving for 37 years.
So is anger part of grief?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And who are you angry at?
God, your life, your circumstance. How could I make a special needs child? Why wasn't my child normal? I mean, you name it. There's a host of things of why you can be angry.
All right.
Yeah. But so then depression hits, and I think I'm kind of through the depression stage. And I'm kind of in the bargaining stage where I'm saying, God, you know what? I know he's in a better place. I know you got him. Could I have done more? I got to figure this out still. I'm still trying to get good with it. And eventually I'll get to the full acceptance. So I'm a little ways away from that. It could be weeks or months from now, but I've kind of matriculated through that. But listen, I've had help. I've got people I talk to.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do you have somebody around you that's...
Yeah, man, you can't. I mean, you can, but grieving alone is not cool. Because it's why people end up doing crazy things, is because you just think that this could not have happened to me. And I don't care if it's a divorce, a loss of a job, an addiction, it doesn't matter. Life is not meant to be lived alone. And listen, as we say with raising children, it takes a village, right? Parents, grandparents, siblings, neighbors, whoever you can get to stay sane through the process, it's a bonus. So if you're in a process of grief, don't feel like you're alone, and especially don't do it alone. There's good people around you. There's free help out there. There's insurance help, depending on your insurance, friends and family and other people, maybe that you don't even realize that are available around you. Reach out, share with people that you're hurting, and let the process work. The worst thing that can happen is you stuff it and you end up with worse situations. I did a story the other day on Fox Live Now, and it was about suicide prevention, which this month is Suicide Prevention Month, and last week was Suicide Prevention Day. So I did a story that day, and the number 2 leading death to young people is suicide, only second to accidental death, which is young people jump off buildings, they think they can fly, they crash in cars, they're just always trying to kill themselves. That's part of what growing up is, I guess. So in the veteran world, a suicide takes place every hour of every day, and those are conservative numbers. Every single day, a veteran commits suicide because they feel like they have no hope. They're stuck in what happened with them or to them on the battlefield or in the war zone, wherever they were. And 50% of those as veterans are over the age of 50. These aren't young kids. These are real people with real issues that get stuck. and they don't process through. So part of what I train people with post-traumatic stress is there's this side, which is the trauma, and there's this other side, which is the new reality. And I'm going to help you cross that. It may feel like you're on a tightrope, but you can get across that. And there is a way to live after loss.
That's been powerful. Thank you, Terry, for the information today. If somebody wants to reach out to you and have you walk them through all these processes, how do they get in touch with you?
TerryLyles.com, TerryLyles.com. I have a lot of free resources. My latest book, Performance Under Pressure, I have a section there on grief and loss. Actually, the forward to my book is very powerful by a retired 2-star general who suffered phenomenal loss in his life. And it's just a great read, not just because I wrote it, it's because I had a lot of other people influenced in it. So TerryLyles.com.
So why don't we do this as one of our next episodes? Let's talk about grief and some of the processes and tools, especially about what's in your book, so that people can pick up the book and what the free resources are about. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks, Chet, for just even, doing this with me, having this conversation, because I think it's something that's not talked about a lot.
Yep.
Because it's looked at as weak, shameful, and we have to be able to just address the real stuff that's going on out there in our lives. So again, just to reiterate, if you're having issues, especially if you feel suicidal, there's a national line now. It's just 988. All you got to do is dial that on your phone, and it takes you directly to a hotline. So just know that there's people out there for you. They're with you, and we're all here together to do this thing together and work through our lives. I mean, we all have issues in our lives. Every day it's different, but just know that there's people and resources out there for us. Just don't think you're by yourself, and don't think that there's no one there. There's always someone around.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that. I look forward to our next meeting on Influence Today. Thank you.
Thank you.